ready to go here. Whenever John gets back, we'll just start.
We can go ahead and get started. John's busy here. We'll just go ahead. You just start, Mr. Arnold. You don't need to talk to that. You can talk to me. It'll pick up the sound real well.
Just tell them my name?
Yeah, start off.
My name is John H. Arnold. I was born in Howell County at Moody. My parents were raised in the Ozarks. Their forebears came from Tennessee and Alabama. And I grew up in the country while it was new. My father moved to Arkansas when I was 6 years old, and we lived there till I was 17, then back into Missouri again. I grew up mostly when in my young days I was in Oregon County around a place called Garfield. And it's east of Thayer, about 12 miles. And I went to school at the old country schools. I went to 5 different schools, little log schoolhouses. And we finally got a better schoolhouse, but I was behind in my schooling when we moved back to Missouri, and I had to study pretty hard to keep it going.
Do you remember the names of the schools, the 5 you went to? Or were they in Missouri or Arkansas?
Part of them's in Missouri, part of Arkansas. The log schoolhouses that I went to, there's one called in Missouri, Oregon County. It was called...
well, that's all right. I just thought if you hadn't mentioned them, remember. That's all right. Go ahead.
And one, the Bland Schoolhouse, a little log schoolhouse down in Arkansas. And another was in Missouri on James's Creek.
What about your teachers?
The teachers were old-time teachers, didn't know too much, and they were peculiar, we might say, in their teaching, different from what they teach now, very different. And we had pretty good time in school. We'd have spelling matches with other schools and so forth. Mostly the people were old-time settlers. But at the Bland School in Arkansas they went to, that was being settled up, that country, by people from different states, like Kansas and Illinois, and maybe some from other states around, and mostly Germans. It was a German settlement. And then when we moved back to Missouri, I went to school at Garfield and then went to high school at Alton, the county seat of Oregon County.
You went on to high school then. How many grades?
How many grades now?
Yeah. Did they have them? Yeah.
I don't remember how many grades, but they never had graduated anybody at all. And 2 years after I went, they graduated two pupils.
Well.
And I went to their graduation exercises.
Now, what was the age groups in these schools? Were some were older, weren't they? Were there some young people, young adults that were still in school or trying to get an education?
In the country schools, they could go as long as they wanted to. No difference about the age. And in the high school, it was about the same way, but not many went, only those that aimed to continue their education.
What about discipline? Were they a little rougher than they are nowadays?
Then they were pretty rough in school sometimes. Sometimes they'd run a teacher off, make him quit. And the larger boys sometimes almost take over. One teacher they got a new teacher at one school where they run a teacher off, and they got a fellow that's pretty good size and square-shouldered. And he told them there's just one rule everybody needed to do right. And he said he'd play with the boys at recess. He liked to play, and if any of them wanted to fight, he was their huckleberry. And the country settled up by different people from different states, and I have great respect for the people that endured all that and settled the country. I don't like to hear people make fun of them.
Then what did you, what was when you were a young man, just a normal day for you? What time did you get up, and what you had chores? I mean, why don't you talk a little bit about just what you did during the day when you were a young man?
When I was young?
Yeah.
When I went to school, we went to the country school, and there was 3 of us boys. When we got home, part of them done the feeding, the milking, of what milking there was done, just enough to do with the family. And I chopped wood usually while the others are doing that. And then when I grew up, I was around among the young folks, and we had parties, square dances, and so forth, and went lots, rode horseback, walked. I finally got a buggy. I was one among the few young men that had a buggy. And we sometimes have a little trouble at the dances, and sometimes usually come out all right, didn't have much trouble.
What did you square? What kind of dancing was there? Square dancing, or was it jig dancing?
The dancing was square dancing, no noun dancing at all. And sometimes it'd be drinking dances, but usually they were all pretty nice.
Did any of them jig still when you were a young man?
Anyway.
The jigging, what they call jigging,
Yes, part of them. They didn't square dance like they do now. They didn't all have the same step. Every fellow danced his own step. Some would take the back step, some jigged.
Mm-hmm.
First one went another, and had callers to call, tell them what to do. And then we'd have lots of what we call protracted meetings, and that's what they were. And we'd go to them, go several miles sometimes. I know I went one time 2 weeks without missing a night. And one reason we went was because the girls went. And we had, I think, as much pastime as they do now, and cost less. And the farming that we done was with the teams. My father had a team of horses and a team of oxen, both on the same land, and he was considered a good farmer. He lived at that time in Arkansas on the farm, and then when he moved back to Missouri, he bought 2 farms, finally traded both of them for one of the best farms in the county, and kept it till he was too old to farm anymore.
What county in Arkansas did you live in? Do you remember? Or what town?
We lived in Sharp County, Arkansas. It's a long county, has 2 central places to do business, county seats. One at Hardy, and one at Evening Shade in the south part. And the farming was all done by teams. There was no machinery of any kind that a team couldn't handle.
How'd you get across the White River? When you went back and forth into Arkansas, how did you get across the White River? Did you have a bridge? There weren't any bridges then, were there?
Didn't have any White River.
So you're north of White River.
Oh, but I mean when you went back into Arkansas, when you crossed, well, you don't remember that. You were just a small boy, weren't you?
There's no river there.
Yeah.
White-
Oh, White's already gone down.
White
That's right.
has,
It's already
south of where they live.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
I built a house before I was married. I bought a part of my father's place and cleared it up. There wasn't any buildings on it. About 15 acres of land cleared, and I cleared up a farm from the woods. And I had a house built. I got the dimension stuff sawed close to there when I lived, and it cost me $1.00 laid down on the ground. And then I bought the ceilings and the floors, such like, at Winona, Missouri, and I had to go after it with a team. They notified me when they'd send it down to the end of the tram, and I had to cross 11 points in going, and I'd never crossed it before. A fellow told me to go straight across till I got almost across, and then turn up the stream and go up to where the road was started out. And I began to get scared. I thought it was going to wash my wagon bed off, but I made it all right.
Was that close to Greer Spring where you crossed?
Close, not there.
Yeah, but close to it. What mills did you use in that area? You used to go to mill, didn't you? To
There
grind?
was a mill at north of Alton, near the river, and then there was a mill at, what's that one you got the picture of?
Turner Mill.
Surprise?
Turner,
Yeah.
Turner Station.
Turner Mill then.
Yeah.
Turner on 11 Point River, and just east of there was Irish wilderness, settled by Irish people, and they stayed there for quite a while, but finally most of them left and the natives took over there. And that was very rugged. 2 big mills near there that's sawing up the pine timber, and when the pine timber was gone at Winona, they sold the place, the land and all timber, to the Long Pine Timber Company. And they finally worked up all the timber that would make ties. They'd make them later. They'd make ties along the 11 Point River, and then make rafts of it and run it down the river to Black Rock where it could be loaded on the train. And there was lots of ties made all over the country there.
Do you remember what you got for your ties? How much you were paid?
No, I don't. I didn't make any.
You didn't hack ties.
I never. No, I didn't.
Well, what did you do besides? Did you do anything besides farming to make a living?
Yes. When I got through school, high school, and went to college at the old college in Springfield, Missouri in 1905, I took one summer there, and then I had already taught 2 schools then, and I taught 9 schools altogether, and then I quit and worked in a hardware store a year, and didn't like that too well, and I went back to the farm and farmed the rest of my life, the rest of my working days. I'm now 96 years old and not able to do much anymore.
Dad, were you living in Mammoth Spring at the time that they rode into town on horseback and robbed the bank?
No, I just moved out. I knew all about it.
When did this happen? Can you tell us about that now?
After I worked in Mammoth Spring in a hardware store for a year, I went back on my farm, and after that, a short time, there was a bunch of boys and men that had been stealing cattle around Thayer and Mammoth, and they tried robbing the Mammoth Spring Bank, and one of them knew that he wanted one of them killed, and he told it, and they killed one man when they could have captured him without it. But they made a failure in getting the bank robbed. They didn't get any money. And they were all native boys around there, men.
Well, now, you know, today, young people have television and the movies and automobiles. They can go anywhere. When you were a young man, everything was centered in a smaller area. I mean, I'm sure you had just as much fun. But now, what was more or less the center of your social life? Was it the church or the schoolhouse or both? Or
Well, of course, that would depend on who it was with mine. I went to church and Sunday school, that's, but I went to other places too. I went to dances, square dances, anywhere where I could have a little fun.
where did they have these usually? In homes? Or?
They had the square dances in homes, and I went where the girls went.
Yeah. Now, were there, and I don't mean for a pastime, there was more actually roughhouse then, wasn't there? There
Yes.
was more fighting. I mean, they weren't, I don't mean vicious fighting, but I mean just fisticuffs were more just a way of life, weren't there, among some of the
Yes.
young men? Did you remember any stories, any particular stories about that type of thing? Or one thing I'm thinking of is that I've heard from a lot of people that at nights especially, or when there were church meetings, that there were sometimes a group of boys would try to break the meeting up. Did you ever have that
Yes.
happen?
In my time when I was young, there was some very rough characters among the young men, and they'd sometimes try to break up a dance, or they'd even try to break up a meeting sometime, religious exercises. And they were sometimes fights, fist fights at the dance, or other places, and they had to make their own fun then. We'd have chicken roast, steal chickens and roast them, and anything to make fun, which they would play jokes on each other, and Halloween and Christmas, all kinds of things that's done, because we didn't have any place to go, not like it is now, and we had to make our own fun. And
Do you remember any particular games that you used to play? Do you remember any of the ones that you did? Or
well, we'd play different kinds of games, and I myself always liked to play some kind of a running game because I was a good runner, and I couldn't play ball very good, and so I didn't like to play ball too well. But we had organized little ball teams around over the country and play against each other. Had horse races sometimes, racetracks, and we'd had anything of that kind that we could go to entertain ourselves, because there was no television, no nothing of that kind like there is today to go to. We'd steal watermelons.
Dad, sometimes at the protracted meeting or brush arbor meeting, some fellow would slip out, and if he didn't like another fellow, he'd cut the fenders off his stirrups, wouldn't he, or the leather off the
Yeah, do
what do
different
you call
things
it?
like that. I went to a dance once, and we had a little trouble at the dance. One bunch of boys was going to take the floor, and the rest of us didn't want that done, and we had a little trouble about that, and some of them cut the fender off my saddle.
what's the fender now? You have to
Fender's a
explain.
piece that protects your
Oh,
legs if
yeah.
that. And
just above the stirrup.
I don't know whether they done it just because they had it in for me, or whether some fellow wanted to have sole shoes.
Do you remember the first automobile you saw?
It was in Springfield, I guess. In 1905, when I went to college in Springfield, there was very few automobiles in Springfield, and they looked like the running gears of a grasshopper. And this was the first automobiles I had seen. And when they got them out in the country, we'd have lots of runaways with our teams when we'd meet an automobile. They'd have trouble of that kind. But
Who had the first automobile in Mammoth Spring that had the high wheels?
well, that one had the high wheels. They're just shipped in there. They shipped one to Mammoth Spring that had wheels like a buggy. iron rim on it and spokes and wheeled like a buggy, and I thought that would be the very kind that go over stumps and big rocks and things. They tried to go to Salem with it, and they couldn't get up the hill, couldn't climb, and had to ship it back to Springfield. And the man that I worked for in the hardware store, or Palmer, sold the first Model T that is he sold a Chevrolet, I believe. First automobile that sold in Arkansas. And he afterwards moved to Springfield with his business and had the Chevrolet business, which he later sold to Terrell and Phelps. And it's still in operation.
How did you come to Springfield when you came to school here? What was your way of transportation? On the train.
Yeah.
The first school was down to Thayer then, wasn't it? Is that where?
Yes.
Well, what was the major industry down for people besides farming? What was the major thing that employed people in Howell and Oregon County in that area?
Well, there wasn't much employment, but there was merchants that sold goods of different kinds, grocers and so forth would hire some people. The Frisco had a roundhouse at there, and that employed several people, but that was later moved away. And the people then began to branch out a little in cattle and stock industry, and bought and sold cattle and raised a good many cattle, had free range, and they could raise them cheaper than they could in some places. But they had a poor grade of cattle when they began, but it built up as time went on.
Well, now, is there as much timber now as there was when you were a young man?
Oh, no. Timber, there was lots of good timber when I was young. And my grandfather said that someday the timber'd be scarce, and if he went to cut a big tree down, if there was a nice little small sapling growing close, he'd bend it over and stand astraddle of it and cut the tree down rather than cut it down and get out of the way. And his prediction was right. Now we need timber. There was lots of good timber, and they just wasted it.
With a mill, when the lumber industry was going, what towns, were those towns pretty rough where the lumber camps were, where the people that cut the lumber, were there big camps of them? Do you remember? Or?
Well, that was quite a ways from where I lived, but it was up in the pinery. There was two big mills in the pinery, and they had tram loads running down through the timber, and they'd haul it up on the trains, little cars they had, and it'd give work for a good many men up there. I worked up there a little while one fall and stacked lumber, and then the days were long. They'd have the lights turned on and work a while at night when the days got short, and they'd try to steal time and hide and not work. I'd be on top of a stack of lumber. I wanted to work so I'd keep warm. They would put lumber up to me.
How much did they pay you? Do you remember what your pay was?
No, I don't, but just little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what did you buy in town? When you lived on the farm at home, say especially when you were a youngster living with your parents, were you pretty self-sufficient, or were there certain things you really depended upon the town for to go get? As far as just your living things, you know.
Well, we had to buy some things in town, of course, coffee and sugar and such things as that, but we raised most of our food right on the farm. And we could take our own grain to mills and get it ground, both wheat and corn. Sometimes one person would go to where they grind flour and stay all night, camp out, and take grain for 2 or 3 neighbors. And we'd have to go quite a ways to get our grinding done from where I lived.
What mill did you use the most? Do you remember?
Well, we used the mill at, I guess, at Mammoth Spring more than any other. There was a good mill there on Spring River at a dam built there, and a man in Memphis owned most of the town at that time, and he had a good mill that made flour there. He'd had a deal with some outfit. He could order a carload of wheat, grind it, hold the car it was shipped in, they got it ground, then ship it south as flour. And they bought from all the farmers around there.
What was his name, Dad, that owned the mill?
Oh, Hill.
Hill.
Yeah.
What did they charge you to grind your meal?
Well, they'd take toll. I forgot just how much out of a meal. But the wheat, they'd just buy the wheat. Then you bought the flour if you wanted flour.
These were water-powered mills.
Water power, yeah.
They didn't have steam-powered ones around there. Well, they had water. They had so many springs and everything. Rivers.
That spring,
yeah.
you ever been there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That big spring, there's a dam right below it, you know. And the mill was there, and the mill burned later.
Well,
no mill there.
Dad, didn't the mill, wasn't it powered by electricity that was made?
No, it is
Or did the water
water
the dam?
Water power over the dam,
Over
right?
the dam, didn't
Yeah.
it? In the lake.
Yeah.
Well, now did you teach school?
Me?
You taught school, didn't you?
I taught school 9 years.
Yeah, well, tell a little bit about the school you taught at. What was the name of it?
Well, I taught at 4 different places, and I taught it at my home school 4 years, and we'd take up school at 9 o'clock and stay till 4. We didn't get out early like they do now. And when the days were long, I had about 4 or 5 young ladies that wanted to teach the next year. They hadn't never had algebra. And I'd take an hour, and when the days were long, after the others went home, and teach them algebra. I didn't get any pay for that.
Do you remember the names of the school, or just
One of the first school I taught is called the Jeff School. I taught there 2 years. And I taught at the Tremmel School 2 years.
Do you know where were these schools? Can you kind of tell me? Were they in that neighborhood?
That was in Oregon County, southern part of Oregon County. And I taught Garfield 1 year, and then Ghetto, my home school. I taught 4 years there.
How to get that name? Ghetto.
The reason they called it Ghetto, there was a district there called Garfield, and it was very large. Some of the pupils would have to walk 3 miles to get to school. And they divided it, and some people said after they got it divided that the new one would kill the old one. And Ghetto killed Garfield, the president, and so they called the new school Ghetto. And it still was with the name of Ghetto. But there's no school there anymore.
Here, let me...
And it was a very large building, 3 stories high. And an awful long stairway with a banister to slide down. And then Springfield was about 40,000. And on the square, they had streetcars, and there was a Y on the square that they turned the streetcar around, come up to the north, and then turn around there on the square and go down north again on the same track. And there's one track out Elm Street that went down to the old Normal, Cherry and Pickwick. Then they just turn and go back. And then on this square was nothing like it is now. Small buildings where the big buildings are mostly.
Remember the
The courthouse was where on the corner where hers is now, and it was an old frame building. needed very much repairs. And the two towns, Old Town or the Square, and New Town, the Square, and the Old Town is on north on Commercial, and there was woods between, trees growed up, path, not a sidewalk, but a path that went from one to the other if you walked, and a muddy road if you drove through with a team. Camel Street was paved with blocks of wood stuck down endways, and Cherry Street, or Elm Street, was paved with brick, and there was not much pavement anywhere, and the people would drive their teams in, drive through the square, down to Camel, and there was a place where they could camp and feed their teams, and so forth. And the stores were nothing like they are now. There was one bank, Union National Bank, which at the old place on the square where it stood for many years. And the hotel, there was two hotels, one on College and one on east there, a little ways at the first block on St. Louis Street. And the shows were mostly Nickelodeons. Pay a nickel to go in and see one. You could see all of them in an hour or two. And there was a streetcar that run each night out to Dolan Park, and that was a great place to go for amusement on Sundays. The old buildings then are mostly torn away, and new ones put up now on the square and everywhere else nearly.
Did you ever stay at the Metropolitan Hotel? Did you ever stay at the Metropolitan Hotel, or when you came to Springfield?
No, I never did stay there. I've been in it several times. And
You used to go down there, you and the boys, tell about that.
used to go down to the, is that Metropolitan?
Mm-hmm.
On College. Yes. A bunch of boys used to go down there and sit around, and they got tired of it and asked us if we had rooms there or anything. We told them no, and they wanted us to quit coming. We did. And bunches of us, a lot of us would go to town and walk part of the time we'd ride back on a streetcar, and we'd come down Cherry Street some kind, and that was comparatively a new street then. Trees that was growing there then, about 6 inches through, or 16 inches through now. And it was quite different to what it is now. And the two towns, north and south, kind of fought each other then. They finally got reconciled and went together and built a new courthouse and so forth, and done a little better.
Was there a rivalry between Drury College and the normal school?
Well, somewhat, a little bit.
But did any incidents happen at the normal school that you can remember? Any funny things happen there?
No, I don't think of any particular.
Did the girls slide down that banister?
Yes, one of them slid down, and there's a newel down at the end of it. You had to go over, and she fell over and broke her arm. The girls slid down and said the banister just same as the boys.
Do you remember how many students there were there when you went?
No, I don't. There's a lot of them.
Did you board at the school, or did you board in homes around the school? Where did you live while you went to school?
Well, they had rooms in the upper third floor that they rented out, and then any place that you wanted to, you could get the people around close to give a room. I boarded 2 or 3 different places while I was there, and I boarded with one place where there's 3 sisters and a brother kept house, and the youngest girl went to school, and the rest of them worked, and the oldest girl was the boss, and she was a good one. And
Now, at the reunion 2 weeks ago, tell about that. You were what now at the reunion? They gave you a
Homecoming?
Yes, homecoming, yes, excuse me.
I went to the homecoming a short time ago, and I was the only person there that had gone to the SMS, or the normal school they called it then, in that year. Of all the pupils that went, I was the only one that was there. And not many that went there at all. There was 5, I believe, of us there that went to the old normal. And they were building it, and we would walk down on Sundays, crowds of us sometimes, the pupils would go to the National Cemetery, and we'd walk down by where the school is now, SMS, and it would be a dusty road. Some places corn are growing on one side, and we had just Russell for our pastime. There wasn't much to go to in Springfield like there is now. We'd go to, on Sundays, very often go to Dolan Park, and
What were you telling me earlier? Do you want to talk about what happened? You told me you were a spectator at a prank that happened at the school. The story you were telling me earlier about turning over the outhouse. Didn't they turn over an outhouse there at SMS?
you want me to tell that?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
One night when there was a little building called Craig Hall, a little brick building with 8 rooms in it. There were 2 boys to each room, and 6 rooms. A widow lady and her son kept 2 rooms, and she kept the building, looked after it. We had an outdoor toilet, and they didn't keep it up in good shape, and the boys turned it over one night. I had my shoes off, but I had been with him. I stood in the door and watched him. And Mrs. Dark, that owned the building, she didn't like it much, and she told the president of the school, and they had a little kangaroo court about it. They called me in as a witness and asked me if I knew who turned it over, and I told them I did, and they asked who it was, and I told them I was like the little boy the calf run over. I didn't have anything to say, and I didn't tell them at all. Finally, the President Taylor says, "I've decided it's been turned over," and he got up and left. And that was about all there was to it. And
when you mentioned the National Cemetery now, you knew, of course, a lot of Civil War veterans. And was your family affected by the Civil War, or did they
they
fight
were
in
affected,
it?
of course, but none of them in it.
Did any incidents
They
happen over in...
during the Civil War, it was a bunch of jayhawkers that came there. They were Northern soldiers that took my grandmother Arnold prisoner and kept her over one night. And then they let her go. And there was bunches of outlaws, I'd call them, that would claim to be soldiers, and they'd steal and rob. One time they took everything that my mother's parents had to eat, and they lived on wild weeds for 2 or 3 days they could gather and cook. And it was rather rough all along the border line between the 2 factions that were fighting. And
the old log house and smokehouse is still standing in the Jeff community that your grandfather lived in when they come and took his meat, wasn't it?
yes,
Uncle Arthur took us down there.
it's still, it wasn't too long when
Yeah,
I
I was
went
along.
by there. The old house that my grandfather Arnold lived in when he came up from Alabama. I don't know what year, a long time ago. And it's still, so far as I know, it's still standing yet.
Were there still a lot of people that hunted when you were
Oh,
young?
yes.
Yeah.
There was lots of people that depended on hunting to get their meat. You could kill deer any time of the year and any kind of deer, or any other game. Had to have no license to hunt or anything of that kind. It's all free. And a lot of people just hunt to get their meat. While there's others that raised hogs and cattle, and they're free range. Everything was turned outside. And it's quite different to what it is now.
How did you tell whose cattle were who on open range? How did you know which were your hogs?
Well, they earmarked the hogs. My father's mark was a swallow fork in each ear. And the cattle, sometimes, if they had many out, they'd brand them with a branding iron. And sometimes they put labels in the ears. That wasn't very good. It's too easy to take out. And there was some cattle stealing and hog stealing, quite a bit of hog stealing went on. Hogs would get off and get kind of wild, and some of them would disappear. I even had some after I was married. Had some stolen out of the woods.
Now, what the game you mentioned deer, but what was some of the other game you remember, or wild animals that lived in the woods at that time?
There was, besides the deer, there was lots of wild turkeys. I've seen as many, I think, as 25 turkeys together, where some bunches would get together. But my father never would let me hunt much. He said a man that run around over the country with a gun on his shoulder and a dog at his heels wasn't no count. I never killed but one wild turkey in my life, and no deer.
Well, were the bear gone and the panthers? They were gone.
Yeah, the bears and panthers were gone.
Yeah.
The wolves were pretty thick.
Wolves were still.
Timber wolves. But many hear them howl every night. And the fencing was all done with the rails for a long time. And the people would have rail maulings. They'd cut their timber and have it ready, and then ask the neighbors in and make a bit of them into rails. And that was one way of having pastime. Have a big dinner, and the women would get together and cook the dinner, and the men would vie with each other about strength and the hand spike, and see who could lift the most, and so forth. And then they'd have house raisings to make a log house or a barn raising and things like that, and they'd get together. They had to do that to be together sometime. There's nothing to go to much. Maybe church once a month. Later, as the time developed, the country did, and slowly.
What a threshing time. How many people usually came to your farm? A person would have a threshing machine, wouldn't he? And then he would rent it.
He'd rent it and thresh all over the country.
Would you feed the whole crews, or how did you do that when the big crews would come to help?
Well, they'd feed them. When they had wheat to thresh, they'd swap work with each other. The farmers around helped each other thresh. If one had more than the other, that didn't make any difference. You'd keep that count like that. And they'd take 20 to 22 or 3 men to do the threshing. Women would together in and do the cooking, have a big dinner, and they'd, besides working hard, they'd get a lot of fun out of it.
Well, now, one thing I want to talk about, though, is medical care. Now, today we take for granted the fact we have the big hospitals and all the doctors and everything. But now, let's talk a little bit about how you got along then when a person got sick or that type of thing. Did you use a lot of home remedies? And
when people were sick, they had lots of home remedies, like the Indians had, different kinds of things that they could make teas and things out of, and they'd use that. And then the old-time doctors would go to see the patient. You'd go after them. Most of them went on horseback, and they'd take their own medicine with them, and they'd go sometimes till they'd almost drop with want of sleep. Doctor would, you'd be run to death. And one time, they sent me after the doctor for my father, and I thought when I was a boy, and I thought when a person had to have a doctor, they was about dead. And I was riding a horse, it was about 3 miles where I went, and when I started back, I went ahead of the doctor just a little ways, all the way on a long trot. But I was just scared. There was no use of that, doing so much. But the doctors would go sometimes till they'd almost drop or they want to sleep, going night and day. And they didn't charge much, and they lost lots of what they did charge. They wouldn't pay them. And
do you remember any of the particular remedies? Do you remember any things that you would do around that your mother would do or your grandmother would do? Things that...
Well, about the only remedies I know anything about was teas, mullein tea and catnip tea and dollarweed tea. And
how would they usually make like mullein tea? That's made out of the mullein plant, isn't it?
Take the mullein plant, I'd say stew it, boil it, and make tea out of it.
You had poultices too, didn't you, Dad?
And what?
Poultice?
Yeah, they used poultices. I had a sister that's sick. I suppose she had slow fever, what they might call it later, and they wouldn't give her a drink, and she was thirsty, and they'd just take a wet cloth and put it to her lips. And now they'd give them water if they didn't want it, you know. And they'd take peach tree leaves and bran, wheat bran, and make poultices and put hot poultices on them when they should have had ice poultices.
Well, when I was born, I was the first one. Dr. Ray came out and stayed. He came 14 miles by horse and buggy, and
No, you got it too far. He come about 5 or 6 miles.
5 or 6 miles, and he stayed 2 days and nights, didn't he, at
Yeah.
your place? And when I was born, what did he charge you?
$8.
Well, were there still what I always heard called granny women or midwives that worked
Yes,
in the
there was
area?
midwives, and when he was born, I had a midwife and a doctor too. It was our first baby, and I wasn't young. I was almost 30 years old. Well, I was 30 when he was born, over 30 a little. We married the 8th of April, 1908, and I was 30 the following September.
I told him I'd have been worth it if he'd had to pay twice that amount.
Why, sure. Do you remember some of the doctors besides the one John mentioned? Who were some of the other doctors when you were a young man you remember in that area?
Yeah, there was three Dr. Forrest's brothers. 2 of them lived near me in the area where I lived. The other one lived at over in, I guess, in Taney County. Maybe no, it wasn't. Might have been Howell.
Yeah.
Is it, I can't think of the place now. It's over west of Moody where I was born. And then there was Dr. Davis, who lived close, and none of them had gone to any medical school to mount anything.
Now, when you talked about clearing land, you didn't have a gasoline-fed tractor or anything. How did you go about it if you went to a patch of timber? How would you clear it?
Chop it with an axe.
What about the roots then and everything? How did you get those out?
They went
The trunks and the...
fencing. Well, they split out later. You didn't do that as you cleared. You might cut if you come to a tree that would make rails, you might leave a cut about 8 feet long, and it split them out with wedges, mauls and wedges, split them. And my father hired most of the rails split. I didn't ever split any rails to mount anything. I hired some split too. Then when I went to farming, we got to use wire fences. We'd burn our old rails for wood and put in a wire fence once in a while for a quarter of a mile, and next year some more, and so forth. And when I cleared the land, I bought 130 acres of land from my father. When I went to clearing the first fall that I bought it before I was married a few years. And I cleared 10 acres myself. And I chopped everything, left the trees that was, we would say, we cut everything a foot and under. And if a tree had a big hollow in it, we'd cut it. And we'd deaden the other trees. Cut around them.
Cut the bark out.
They do it, I guess.
Yeah.
And deaden it. And when I left that place, I was on it, lived on it 9 years. I owned it longer than that and rented some. But when I left it, it was all cleared but 7 acres. And I built a house and barn and bought 80 acres adjoining it. And all the work that we did then was done the hard way.
Yeah.
Never used teams, never had any. I never used a tractor in my life. Always used teams as long as I farmed.
When did you own your first car? Do you remember?
First car?
Your first automobile?
1925.
1925.
I bought the last Model T that got it when it was shipped into West Plains. 1905, and I had electric lights and shock absorbers, balloon tires. I thought I had an automobile.
Yeah. Do you remember the first airplane you saw?
Yes. The first one was around Thayer. I know my father-in-law was getting old, and he said he wanted to live to see how the war ended, the First World War, and see an airplane. We went to Thayer to a gathering of some kind, a picnic we'd call them, and there was a little airplane there. It went up and come down and hung in a wire and wrecked, and that's the end of it. And I asked him then if he was ready to die. He saw an airplane and the war had ended. He just laughed. He didn't answer me.
What first telephone? Do you remember when did you first get your telephone?
Well, we first got telephones in there before I was married, and they were party lines, you know.
Uh-huh.
Come out from after I married and moved on the farm. That was about 1909 or 10, somewhere along there. We built a new line from where we lived out to Thayer. It was about 16 miles, and there was 18 people on the one line. Most of them right out close to where I lived. You'd take the receiver down and ring it. You'd hear receivers coming down everywhere, tick, tick. Sometimes I'd tell them to hang up till I got my party and then take down and listen at me.
Did you have peddlers then that came around when you were a young boy?
Yes, we had
wagons?
peddlers that come around, but they didn't do too well then. They didn't.
How close were your neighbors when you were, before the county really populated with a lot of people, when you were a boy living on your dad's farm? How far apart did people live usually?
Well, when I was a boy living in Arkansas, they were just settling up. There was a few old settlers that lived 2 or 3 miles apart, and then they began to settle up between them, people coming in. And if you was in 5 miles of a fellow, you was his neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're about to the end of this tape here. I better put a date on here. This is October the 24th, 1974.